this is what you wrote. If leaders, in quotes, are not creating a work environment where individuals can be their best selves and do their best work, are they really leading or just creating chaos? Bam. Wow. Talk to me. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say, and the doctor is in the house. Thank you, Dr. Xaulanda Simmonds-Emmanuel is the chief passion seeker and co-founder of the XauSky Group, and she's my sister from another mister. And I'm so happy you finally submitted your dissertation and you slayed it.
I'm done.
You're well, now is when the work begins.
Another chapter of the work begins. Yes.
Yes. Exactly.
But at least the PhD and the dissertation is done, because the last time we were on I Have Something to Say, I was in the crux of just about to give up.
Yes. And no.
I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot lighter, right? Because the weight, the 300-pound gorilla has been lifted off my shoulders.
Yes. And I want to say it again. Congratulations, Dr. Xaulanda Simmonds-Emmanuel. I experienced, or witnessed, right, this process, and I'm so freaking proud of you. I really am. I don't want to cry right now, but I'm so proud of you.
I brought you to tears already yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, this journey, PhD journey, I didn't do it alone. It really took a village to help me cross that finish line, from my immediate family to you, Sami, who I mentioned in a dedication because you are like my sister from another mister. I also mentioned Mercedes, who's our sister from another mister out of Minnesota, who was there at the very beginning. Just amazing people that were there to support me throughout the journey. So that doctor in front of my name is not me alone. It's really a community and a village that helped me accomplish that milestone. So thank you.
Thank you. It's all you, Mama. All you. I saw the, the blood, sweat, and tears. But
the stress.
Ay, Dios mío, el estrés. But here we are, right? And you posted something just a couple of weeks before the holidays kicked in, right? And we're starting the new year, and I think it's something that we should definitely talk about. That's why I invited you to kick off, right, this year, talking about leaders, right, and leadership, because that's your wheelhouse right there, right? It's really training and tapping into people's passions at work and creating these environments where people can show up and feel like they have purpose and are in a space that they're being nurtured, valued, and that they feel that they're contributing to something greater, right? To impact. And so, but you made this post that was very strong, and it really hit home because it took me back to when I was working in the corporate sector, right? And it's been a hot minute, but I'm still exposed to that because we do business with a lot of corporations, and this is what you wrote. If leaders, in quotes, are not creating a work environment where individuals can be their best selves and do their best work, are they really leading or just creating chaos? Bam. Wow. Talk to me.
I got goosebumps. I wrote that.
You wrote that. Talk to me
Yes,
because I
I
get it,
did.
right? Yeah.
The interesting thing is when I wrote that I was in the midst of my entrepreneurial experience and really considering whether I wanted to go back and into a full-time position because we know entrepreneurship is very difficult.
Mhm.
And one of the things I've also tried to do with the clients that I work with is to help them create that environment where their team members can thrive, where their team members can show up authentically and as their whole selves. And so, as I was writing that, doing that interview and trying to decide between entrepreneurship and possibly going back into the workforce, I started to think about leadership, and I think it's important that when we think of leadership, when you define it, it's either the action or the way of leading a group. That's one way of defining leadership, right? The other one is leadership is just a position. You have that authority because you have that position, but not everybody who's in a position of leadership is truly a leader. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
The
totally.
position, authority, and power might give you the title of a leader, but are you truly embodying those leadership qualities that would be able to nurture an environment for your employees where they don't dread coming to work? They don't mind getting up on Monday, where they can show up as their best selves, where they know that their leader is really looking after their best interest and they're able to bring their entire self to work. So when you think of those things, um, looking at leadership from those two perspectives is what I was looking at. One of the reasons I stay in entrepreneurship is I have been in environments where individuals are quote unquote leaders, but I felt that the longer that I was in that environment, the more my light would dim, the less I could bring to work. I had to compartmentalize. And there's this, saying that people say, oh, when you come to work, leave your personal life at the door. And in theory, it sounds good. As a leader,
Mhm.
I used to tell my employees that, right?
Yeah.
But the reality of the fact is that we bring our entire self to work. If you're a mother and your child is homesick, can you really just leave that at the door and focus on work? I mean, it's an unrealistic expectation. And so as leaders, I think we need to bring the humanity back into how we work with our teams, with how we invest in each of our team members, and really looking at it as an investment and not necessarily an expense on the balance sheet. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah, totally,
Mhm.
totally. So what would you say? Because a lot has changed, right? And I think that it was already like these dynamics were already toxic, right? And
Mhm.
chaotic in some
Mhm.
instances. But I just feel like the pandemic
Mhm.
put a magnifying glass, right? On
Mhm.
all of these workplace issues that have been, how do you say, ignored or dismissed because it was just the way to do business. It's like, suck it up, and this
Mhm.
is how it's done, and it's always
Mhm.
been done, and it's not going to change. But then, people were faced with those decisions, right? Do I leave? Do I stay? And all of that. So, what would you say are some of the attributes or characteristics of a modern day leader, taking into account the new generation and how people function and work flexibility and the needs, right, of different employees, some like basic things that people need to stop and think about, their
Right.
leadership styles. Mm-hmm.
Before I share that, I want to go back to something you said in regards to the shift that we experienced with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay. From my perspective, what the pandemic did was activated or allowed people to no longer remain silent when they were
Mhm.
experiencing that. People started speaking up because of other social justice movements like Me Too, because of George Floyd. People felt this visceral reaction to speak up and stand in their power. The reality is, though, the pandemic is only shy of 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And, there's this famous quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so, even though the pandemic created this catalyst where people were using their voice, and that veil of silence was lifted with a lot of the injustices that were happening in the organizations. It's
Mm-hmm.
only years. And usually, to change the culture of an organization, there's a lot of factors that need to be considered. And it typically takes a good 7 to 10 years to really start to shape a culture into what you want it to be. So I put that caveat on there because I think while we are seeing trends in the right direction, we're still in the infancy stage of those changes, right?
Wow.
And so when you start to think about toxic leadership, I was doing some research because I like the data, right? I know I have my thoughts, but I like the data to be able to support my points or to dispute my points and open up my thinking. And I was reading this scholarly article by Andrew Alexander Smith out of University of Maryland, and they listed four primary things for toxic leadership, right? One of them is authoritarian leadership. Somebody who really needs to hold on to as much power and authority and control possible, right? They need to hold on to that. So that's that authoritarian leadership. Abusive, abusive supervision. Now, a lot of people know that they may not quit their jobs because of the organizations. They typically quit their jobs because of their supervisor or manager, right?
Right.
So if you have an abusive supervisor, based on psychology.com, they define it as sustained display of non physical forms of hostility perpetuated by supervisors against their direct reports. So that's when we're talking about abusive supervision. That's what we're talking about, right? Narcissism. We have many examples in our current society that we can use for narcissism.
Let's not
There's
even go there. Let's not go there.
no, there's certain topics we're not going to get into because then this podcast would be more than the allotted time frame. But we know what they look like, right? Sound
Right.
like, feel like. Is that selfishness? Is that sense of entitlement, that lack of empathy, needing admiration, right? So that's the narcissistic part of it. Self promotion. A lot of leaders that are displaying toxic leadership, rarely do you see them give credit or acknowledge their subordinates for the contributions and the work that they have done to make sure the organization moved in the direction it needed to move. And usually you'll hear that leader say, "Oh, I did this," or "I did that." There's a lot of I and ego in
Yeah.
that promotion. And then just the unpredictability. Usually you're not quite sure exactly what to expect from that leader. And I remember, working in an organization where individuals were saying, "Oh, Shalonda, you're doing such a great job," you know, and I felt I was doing a great job. I was doing my best at the role that I was given, and I was really trying to invest in my team members. And then the next couple weeks later, it's like, "Oh, you did this and you did this and you did this." Well, just a couple weeks ago, you said I was doing a great job. Like, how did we make this drastic change from then to now, right? So you
Right.
see types of characteristics displayed in toxic leadership. Hmm.
But so then this is the critical question here, right? It's can it be fixed, or
Hmm.
right? I mean, because then where the opposite would be um not authoritarian, so it would be embrace inclusive, right? And
Transformational leadership or servant leadership would be a good opposite point of
right.
that spectrum.
And
Hmm.
that looks like someone that is collaborative, that
Hmm.
listens, that takes into account,
Empathy.
that expresses empathy, all of those good things. When we're
Hmm.
talking about abusive supervision and micromanagement, I saw that that's like just being on top of people, on top of people, on top of, and it becomes overwhelming. I've
Yeah.
been in that position, and it's
Hmm.
horrible. you're about to
Mhm.
have a heart attack, right? Because you feel like
Yes.
like my goodness, just let me do my work,
Breathe.
right?
Can I breathe for a minute, right? So the
Yeah.
opposite of that abusive relationship, some of the characteristics you find in those leaders is that they tend to be more patient. They
Hmm.
tend to listen a little bit more. They're flexible. There's that level of honesty. You don't feel as an employee that you're constantly in self-preservation mode. This
Yeah.
this trigger of fight or flight. Whenever you're in those toxic environments, that's typically what you experience, right? Is that stress level gets heightened and you feel like, okay, I need to just preserve my position, especially if you rely on it for your livelihood. And so you're just doing what you need to do to be able to survive. It's
Yes.
not
Yeah.
where you're feeling you have an ability to thrive. You have an ability to learn new things, an ability to be innovative, the flexibility to make mistakes, right? We're all human. We're going to make mistakes in any role that we're in. But as leaders, if you really want to nurture your team, you have to give them permission to explore new things, to propose new ideas, and to make mistakes. That's part of the learning process. Providing that mistake is not totally detrimental to the viability of the organization. There are lessons to be learned from making mistakes because then you find better ways of doing things. I mean, when
Yes,
we look at
totally.
entrepreneurs, a lot of it is trial and error, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, so then question here.
Mhm.
Can can a leader, because I have my notes here, right? Can a leader that displays toxic characteristics be fixed?
I think it depends on the degree
Hmm.
and the display of toxicity.
Okay.
In some cases, I would say yes, they can be salvaged. If it's a mild degree of toxicity where the person probably needs to do some self reflection, they're willing to do the work. They understand that what they're doing may not be working, or they understand what they're doing may be detrimental to their team members, and they're open to being reflective. They're open to be coached. They're open to do things to help broaden. Then I would say yes. The challenge with a lot of toxic leaders is that their behaviors get more and more severe because the environment that they are in have reinforced that toxic leadership
Yeah.
or has applauded it, right? So some toxic leaders may come off as very, very charismatic, right? And they may be able to get things done through their people, but that's based on fear. It's not based on the genuineness to really want to do good work, to show up as your true self.
Right.
So it
Loyalty, caring,
right,
dedication, trust, all of it.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I would say it depends. It depends on the individual. It depends on the organizational culture that they're functioning within. Because if you hire someone that you find are displaying toxic leadership qualities, right? And you're an organization that says we don't do things like that here, you have a couple options. You can either coach that person to help them align with the organizational culture, or you can help them successfully find employment elsewhere, which is to show them through the door because they do not align with the values that you have. Let's
Yeah.
just think, right? But toxic leaders tend to stay in environments because that behavior and the performance and the outcomes that they're producing are being condoned.
Right, totally. And you know what? It's so funny that you mentioned that. And those
Mhm,
are the options, right?
mhm,
And that's the decision of the C-suite at that point, right? And sometimes even the
mhm.
C-suite is
C-suite.
toxic.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
because I've been there, right? Where oh
Mhm,
my gosh, yeah, like bad,
mhm,
right? And so so this is the thing. It's so funny too because I went to a presentation last year. And one of the presenters was a very prominent business owner. here in Central Florida, and he was talking um, about hiring, right, and acquisitions and stuff like that. And one of a piece of advice that he gave was that if you have a great performer, amazing performer, charismatic, sales through the roof, amazing. But if he or she, right, or
Mm-hmm.
they are a bad egg, they said you need to get it out because it'll just ruin, right, the organizational culture. And despite the counter intuition, right, to keep, no, you need to keep them because look at the sales, they're through the roof. In the
Mm-hmm.
long run, it would just be, like you said, detrimental, right, to the organization, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
What you see with a lot of those situations is that even though the sales and the performance may be high, a key indicator is if you have a leader and you have employees leaving the organization and there's a constant rotation within their team or their department or their division, the executive leadership needs to ask why. Why is
Yes.
the turnover so high? Right? Because whether we like it or not, HR typically does these exit interviews, and only a very few employees, if they've been in a toxic environment, are going to feel safe enough to say the real reasons as to why they're leaving. Because
Mm.
they don't know if what they say could potentially follow them throughout
Right,
their.
and bite them in the ass. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So they're not going to be truthful. So I mean, as while as a leader, I always like to do exit interviews. I also understood that depending on the environment, some employees are just not going to be honest as to why they're leaving. They're not going to say this leader is abusive, this leader is a bully. They might have the top sales, they might be charismatic, but they do not make me feel safe in this environment, and so I can't take this stress anymore and I'm going to leave. Very few
Mhm.
employees you're going to hear say that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. And so we are both multicultural specialists. We are both equity practitioners. And
Mm-hmm.
so as the demographics are changing here in this country
Mm-hmm.
to be more black and brown, right? At
Mm-hmm.
all levels. How
Mm-hmm.
much do you feel or do you see culture is influencing these workplace dynamics?
Um, it's interesting because I see more of an impact from a generational standpoint
Okay.
than from a racial or ethnicity standpoint.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is I feel like the millennials value having a voice. They have the mechanisms to have their voices heard. And so traditionally, where when we were moving up in corporate America and we were probably dealing with baby boomers, we didn't have social media, right?
Mm-mm.
Just had our friends to support. We couldn't just do a post and it go global or go viral about our organization, right? I mean,
Right.
we have that now, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned by the millennials. And I work with millennials and it can be challenging, right? Because they are going to make sure their voices are heard. But what I've learned is when you really stop to listen to what they're saying, they're looking at whatever work I'm doing, I want it to have purpose. I want to work for an organization that is socially just or aligns with my values, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they look a lot at value alignment. My daughter is on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, and we were having a conversation, for example, about requesting vacation time. And she's like, I don't understand that concept. I have earned it. I should be able to go on my vacation when I want to go on it because I went to work to earn it. When I was approving vacation as a leader, it was like, oh, I need to look at how many people are on vacation. Do I have enough coverage? The organizational need came before the fact that the individual had in essence, earn that vacation time and should have the right to go on vacation. So it's just a different perspective of looking at things. From a racial standpoint, I think after George Floyd, a lot of Black and Brown people started to unite and come together and say enough is enough. So you are seeing a lot of that. The challenge, I think, that and I'm in a DE&I think tank that's actually out of Minnesota. I'm been spending a lot of time in the Virgin Islands, and of course, I've lived on Florida, and we do work there. And so having these conversations are very nuanced depending on the environment, right? So, for example, when I'm having race and ethnicity conversations regarding diversity within the workplace with my colleagues in Minnesota, it's usually from the perspective of a lot of white women seem to be in that field, leading the charge with DE and I. Yet, while they can be empathetic, they don't have the lived experiences of Black Americans or people of African American descent. And so the conversation is slightly nuanced. When I'm in Florida, it's more of a racial and ethnicity conversation based on Latino, people being Hispanic. What does that look like? Me being from the Virgin Islands, we always admire Puerto Rico because the Boricuas are going to speak up. They're going to go out on march. They're going to advocate. They're very nationalistic. And so that's what I experienced in Florida. When I come home in the Virgin Islands, where um, it is a majority community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our governors Black, our senators are Black and brown. Most of the people who live in the community are Black and brown. It's a different kind of conversation because while we are all people of color, what I see is a lot of what my parents used to call the caste system,
Mm-hmm.
the old generational family entitlement, money, and privilege versus who's new and coming up or who has been put in a position of power but do not necessarily display the qualities of a real servant or transformational leader, right?
Right.
Yeah, it depending on the environment and depending on what part of that multicultural dimension you're looking at, the conversation is very nuanced. And I think that's why, DE and I and the work that we do and just dealing with humans is such a complex and multidimensional aspect that there's no one answer. There's no one size fit all. You
Right.
really have to look at the nuances.
Yes, and I totally agree. Those workplace dynamics and culture
Hmm.
depends on the region, on the territory. And when we talk about culture, I'm talking about ethnicity and
Hmm.
all of that, all of those lived experiences,
Hmm.
but then also the culture of the organization. So it's like
Absolutely.
marrying those two things. One of the things that I've experienced as a business owner, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you have too, and I want to say, especially in the last 3 years and coming out of the pandemic, is people being more welcoming to be chill and
Yes.
relaxed, right?
Yeah.
And be more open to the touchy feelies. I mean, it sounds silly, but
Hmm.
to having more friendly conversations that you jump on these calls and it's not like before that it's like immediately business. Let's do business, right?
Hmm.
And so, there's space for connecting more deeply and feeling more part of a collective. And I just feel that these are qualities, less competition,
Hmm.
more collaboration, more sharing of resources. And I feel that's more of of qualities of collective societies. Would you agree?
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. And COVID was the great equalizer, right?
Hmm.
Because when you look at COVID did not discriminate when it came to age. It did not discriminate when it came to your disability, your ethnicity. your race, your indigenous heritage, your sexual expression or sexuality, your religion or spirituality, or your gender. COVID was the great equalizer. While some people had access to resources that were different, the fact of the matter when it came to COVID, regardless of where you are on that cultural spectrum, everybody realized that I am vulnerable. You know what
Right.
I mean? Now, that's when we get into those equity conversations where some people had access to better health care
Right.
than the Black and Brown community, which was devastated because of the lack of access to health care during COVID. That's another conversation. But when you talk about cultural dimension and really being collective, I think because it was that equalizer, everybody had to pause and say, I'm at risk here and I can't be an island, or I might feel like I'm an island, but I'm not in this situation alone. We're experiencing this situation globally. And I think
Hmm.
that is something that, from communities where you and I come from, the islands, which are small, we tend to be a lot more collective. We look out for each other because during a hurricane, the hurricane is in the whole island, right?
Yeah.
Everybody being impacted. And after it's passed, everybody is like, okay, what do you have? I have this. Let's share. Let's come together. Let's rebuild together. There is that more collective mindset. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel that as the workforce is growing in terms of diverse expressions,
Mm-hmm.
that's also influencing the dynamics, even if it's from the ground up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So last but not least,
Mm-hmm.
last but not least, as entrepreneurs, we can, when we walk into spaces, we meet people and network, and we could say, oh, toxic, stay away from this dude, right? Or dudette,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so we have a little bit more, right? Freedom, or if we have a client and we start working, that's what we call the dating period, right? With
Great.
clients
Yes.
too, because that way you start and you have a dating period of 3 months, and then you can jump into bed with them if
Mm-hmm.
everything's going well and you feel like, okay, we're gelling, where
Yeah.
there's something good
Or
here,
break up
right?
if it's not working well.
Exactly, or we break up. But for people that are in a situation, right? Because it's not easy, right, to just jump ship, and sometimes you have to maintain your sanity, right? But that are in that toxic environment or dealing with a toxic leader, what
Mm-hmm.
what are some steps, or what can you do to either survive in that environment, bring attention to your experiences, to try to self advocate,
Mm-hmm.
okay, or and then eventually be able to, I guess, create some wiggle room right, and a buffer while you look for a better opportunity if things don't improve. So what do you do?
I think when you're in those types of environments, it really starts with self because that's the only person you have control over. You don't have control over this toxic leader. You have very limited control, depending on your position, over the organizational culture. So I think first is really doing some self reflection and determining, okay, why am I feeling this way? What is important to me in my role, in my position? And if what is important to you, so one good example is if you work at a hospital that is the only hospital on the island and you've done all your schooling in healthcare and that's the only place that you can work, I can see where that individual or individuals might feel like their options are limited to go elsewhere. And so that's when people start to say, okay, if I want to function within this space, I have to figure out a way to be able to survive it. Right.
Hmm.
Um, but it really determines whether what you're doing, what you want, what your values are, and then what your options are. Right. And once you've done that, then it's okay, what can I negotiate within this space, or what am I willing to negotiate within this space? So, for example, I worked with an employer that hired everybody on. It was at the point in time where they were cutting back, hired everybody on with health insurance. And I was a manager. And I had employees that needed that health insurance because their kids needed the health insurance. And then because the employer just says, oops, we are going to offer health insurance, but it's 3 times more. So are you really offering the health insurance if it's cost prohibitive for people to be able to afford the health insurance? And so for me, as a manager, what I did is I tried to advocate as much as I could for my employees. But I was very honest with them. I said, if you can't afford it, you're going to have to look at other options. For me, that was the last straw with me at that organization, because I was like, any company that says they were providing something to their employees, take it away and make the access so cost prohibitive that it's detrimental to that employee's livelihood, their health, their family. That was a value alignment I couldn't get on board on. So it really determines, your value alignment in that situation. It's not a one size fit all. It's like you got to look at self, you got to look at the environment, you got to look at what you can live with, what you can't live with, what you can negotiate. And if you can make some headway within the environment and maybe that leader leaves and a new leader comes in, or maybe you move to another department that has a leader that maybe is a little bit more aligned with your values, you might be able to negotiate within that environment depending on the players that are there. But if you feel like you're stuck and you've exhausted all options, then it's okay, let me start working on moving out while I try to stay under the radar, which is probably not the best advice. But listen, people have mental capacity, people have emotional capacity, people have financial capacity to only take so much. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Some people can say, you know what, screw it, I'm done, I'm quitting, because they have resources. Others are like, this is it, this is it. So they have to take a little bit more time to figure out other options. But essentially, when it comes to toxic leadership, you cannot, it's very hard for an employee or a leader to change a toxic leader unless they're ready to be changed, or unless there are people higher up that's going to encourage that leader to change, or if the organizational culture is aligned for that leader to change.
Yeah, that's great. This is really great because it provides, some kind of a blueprint on how to navigate that. And it
Mhm,
just popped into my head that financial stability, it's people save, have a stash in the bank. That should be
mhm.
like a goal for everybody to have
Yep.
enough money in the bank, right? To
Mhm,
survive for a year. So
mhm.
that way you're not in a
Right.
pinch.
Yeah. Well, it's saving, yes, but we know as entrepreneurs, what do we try to do? We diversify our revenue stream. So
True.
that job is one source of revenue. What are other things that you can get into? Even if it's investing, where you're a silent investor and hopefully that money grows, you have other sources of revenue so that when you get in that pickle, you have options.
Totally, totally. Listen, Shalonda, I feel I could talk to you for days,
Oh,
and we
girl,
do.
we got to catch up more.
Yeah, totally. Well, we have those Friday morning, Yeah.
Hmm.
So, so listen, I love you. I'm
I
thankful for
love you
you.
too.
I'm so proud of you. I can't wait to see you.
I
And
know it's been too long. I'm going through
I
some withdrawal. I need my fix.
I know, but it's soon, 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 just
Yeah.
in a few weeks. So
Thank
I'm
God
really
for
excited.
video and phone calls. We can keep in touch, but it's not the same as feeling the embrace. And that's what we learned in COVID, right?
Yes,
Feeling the embrace of people that you love.
yes, yes. And sharing some quesito and some totone and some food together and all of that.
Drink a little ching ching.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, I love you. Thank you so much. And
You're welcome. It
y
was
te
my
llamo.
pleasure as always. Super, super fun. Super fun.
Yes, totally. Mwah.
Mm. Bye.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.